Hyllested. We'll talk about Indo-European homeland and dispersal, contemporary linguistic evidence.
There's going to be a linguistic distribution, linguistic contribution to this seminar. Indo-European homeland and dispersals, I'm going to talk mainly about the homeland and mainly about methodology. Contemporary methodology compared to the arguments you can find in most handbooks, most etymological dictionaries of national languages. Actually, there are three questions involved in this problem complex. Scholars ask, where and when? Fixing the homeland in time and space. And who are we talking about? Identifying the speakers and their culture. And whither and when, how, why? Tracing the linguistic migrations, their characteristics, their causes, and their influence on new populations, on local populations, in the areas to which the languages migrate. In his article, The Spread of the Indo-Europeans, that emerged just after Mallory's book In Search of the Indo-Europeans, Frederik Kortlandt wrote, "It is a methodologically legitimate activity to look for archaeological traces of a linguistic group, but the converse does not hold. Speculations about the linguistic affinity of a prehistoric culture are futile because it's reasonable to assume that the vast majority of prehistoric linguistic groups have vanished without leaving a trace. And it is certainly attractive to assign the ancestors of the speakers of Proto-Tocharian, for example, to the Afanasiva culture, but we must never forget that the very existence of Tocharian texts, which have survived, is a purely accidental fact of history due to a number of factors which happened to concur thousands of years after the eastward migrations of the Indo-Europeans." To this we might respond, placing a proto-language in time and space is not the same as identifying it with known archaeological cultures. I would say there are two steps. Fixing a proto-language tentatively, albeit in time and space, and B, identification with one or more archaeological cultures, if possible. Remembering that, of course, these cultures may overlap with languages, linguistic groups, they don't have to correspond to them. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one correspondence. So it's well known to everybody that we have evidence from common vocabulary. So this is the linguistic evidence. But what kind of linguistic evidence? How can we use the common vocabulary? If you look up in most etymological dictionaries of national languages, so to speak, so not comparative dictionaries, but etymological dictionaries, not meant necessarily for scholars only, and in popular introductions to this subject, or just maybe introductory handbooks, even for linguists about Indo-European, the Indo-Europeans and the Proto-European homeland, how to find it. It is very often mentioned in the beginning that we have topographic terms for topographic features, and plants and animals, and then tools and artifacts are mentioned. But in fact, we know now, as compared to 100 years ago, we know now that single terms for example, topographic features are of little value. As Benjamin Fortson writes in his introduction to Indo-European linguistics, they are too basic to be helpful simply. So, for example, the fact that a Proto-Indo-European word for sea, mori or mari, can be reconstructed is no evidence of a homeland near the sea, as otherwise claimed in the beginnings of this of scholarship concerning the pinpointing of the Indo-European homeland. Hermann Hirt claimed this in his two-volume book about the Indo-Europeans. Note that the most famous figures connected with two human populations located in Central Asia, so very far from the sea, Mongolians and Tibetans, are the Mongolian Emperor Genghis Khan, ruler of the sea, from Old Turkish Tengiz Sea, and the Tibetan spiritual leader Dalai Lama, meaning ocean guru. So from Mongolian alone, from Mongolian, Dalai Sea. large lakes also in Central Asia, so even if you are not near the sea, you may have a view over water where you cannot see the other side. In any case, you don't have to live near the sea to have a word for the sea. Same thing with precipitation, so snow. All peoples of the northern hemisphere have words for snow, and earlier lowland populations without domestic snowfall must have known snow from mountains, neighboring areas, or hard winters. Even Saudi Arabia experiences snow once in a while, as they did this year and also in 2008. So it is actually more relevant, or it's more relevant that these single topographic features is a list of criteria that I would begin here with A and B. One is complexity of terminologies pertaining to semantic fields, which we could also call semantic packages. So investigating words with particular meanings very close to each other, if they all show up in the proto-language and other terms don't, then we have a semantic package, a complexity of terminologies pertaining to a specific semantic field. That could be certain topographic features. So if you, for example, if you try to reconstruct Proto-Sami, the Proto-Sami language, there are lots of topographic features that could tell us something about Proto-Sami homelands, because they are much more specific and they together form a complexity of terminologies. But the word that you have a word for snow as such is not at all important, I would say. And B, shared specific semantics of identical formations. So if you have a word, a derivative, which can be reconstructed for the proto-language, and it has a specific semantics which is remarkable. For example, the Proto-Uralic word woke, bivouac, and the snow, I would say that's much more relevant than having a word for snow. This is a cultural phenomenon that you actually need to survive in the cold, in the landscape, and you build a campsite for the night, which can be done under a tree or just in the snow. And I believe this word cannot be reconstructed for example, proto-languages from further to the south, but it's a Proto-Uralic language. It's a Proto-Uralic form with daughter forms in most languages. Apart from topographic features, we also have flora and fauna. Evidence from this terminology, I would say, is more useful. Note, for example, the cultural and mythological significance of the oak tree among Balto-Fennic peoples. The most common surname, for example, in Estonia is Tam, meaning oak, compared to the fact that the oak is not indigenous to the areas where Balto-Fennic languages are now spoken, meaning the Balto-Fennic homeland cannot have been in the present area where you speak Balto-Fennic languages today. But then there are curious lacunae, like, for example, the fact that the two trees denoted elder by most, they're actually not related, closely related, but the two trees are connected in most Indo-European cultures. One is small with red berries, and one is a generic term for several species having mostly black berries, but also red berries, and it's not really a tree, biologically speaking. They're indigenous to all the widely proposed Indo-European homelands. So why is there no common Indo-European term for either of them? And the same goes for animals such as the sturgeon. I mean, if indigenous, the sturgeon, several species are indigenous to the Black Sea and South Russian and Ukrainian rivers, so why is there no common Indo-European term for the sturgeon? This is not an isolated problem. It's the same case with, for example, a lot of mammals like badger, fox, polecat, and so on. So animals that are indigenous to most proposed Indo-European homelands, and certainly to the southern Ukrainian and Russian steppes, bordering the woods. John Shimon, in his article How to Find the Proto-Indo-European Homeland from 2008, mentions that terms for flora and fauna too can refer to species known by hearsay, just like, for example, snow and the sea, from neighboring or more remote populations. So actually, single terms for plants and animals do not in themselves prove that the Indo-Europeans lived in an area where these species actually were indigenous. Again, you have to look at the semantic complexity of groups of names and not just one name at a time, one term at a time. Another point, yes, is that well, you can reconstruct a word for salmon, but what kind of a salmon is it? What kind of species? We don't know. I would object that in popular taxonomy, which is crucial to linguistic reconstructions, terms do not necessarily refer to exact species in modern biological classification. And this makes it less of a goal to reconstruct words for certain species. We should reconstruct popular taxonomy. So if the speakers of Proto-Indo-European thought that the elder and the water elder were one tree or one plant, well, then that is what we have to reconstruct and not the biological species. Maybe they didn't have independent names. Results become safer if plants and animals are grouped in semantic packages, as I said before, certain groups that are more well represented than others. I myself looked earlier, a few years ago, at terms for the elder. So in popular taxonomy, as I said before, the name of various Sambuco species is mixed with the Dane word, and it has several other names in English. And these plants are not very alike, but the confusion seems to be of at least Northwest Proto-Indo-European age. And curiously, they seem to be either derived from words for grey or borrowed from words for grey, maybe because of mold. Some of the words also mean moldy, so it could be mold and berries. We don't have time to go into this in detail, but it's just to show that even if you don't have a common word for a certain species, you can, in some cases, perhaps reconstruct a common semantics that makes up the motivation for this for these terms. And concerning the sturgeon, as I said before, if the Indo-European homeland was situated to the north of the Black Sea, the Indo-Europeans must have known several sturgeon species. And the terms for sturgeon in North and West Indo-European are probably innovations derived of old material. What are the characteristics of the fish if you want to construct a new term for the sturgeon? Well, the most characteristic feature is that it does not have back fins. It has so-called scutes instead of back fins, so they're very hard and protruding. They're not really fins if you touch them. Several Indo-European language groups in Europe seem to have terms that derive from the word for sharp or fin, sharp fin. But the picture is complex, and it's certainly not easy to reconstruct any of them except for the Proto-Germanic word sturio, which might or might not be derived from stert, meaning stiff and hard. Think like a grass species, for example, the star in Danish. But both the Latin one and the Balto-Slavic one might be a compound of sharp and fin, or maybe two very similar meanings. Brian Joseph was here in May 2010 and gave some lectures, and he talked about such semantic archaisms, but he narrowed it down even more, talking about specifically cultural semantics and culture in semantics. So not so much about lexical meanings per se, but more about how words and phrases reflect and interact with and thus reveal cultural notions. Words can mean more than lexical semantics. He mentions culturally sensitive semantics and metaphors that can reveal an ideology connected with particular words, the set of underlying assumptions that go along with how the meaning of a word or a phrase fits into the whole set of associations that it summons up. He pointed out that we can see culture and semantics in etymology, for example by a euphemistic usage that is tied to a cultural belief or a derivation that is quite revealing of cultural practices. Examples such as Danish venstre, left, based on the root of ven, friend, a euphemism not unlike Greek aristeros from the root for best, where one can detect a taboo against being too overt in mentioning of the suspect and less normal left hand, suspect and less normal left hand. Or Albanian dars, wedding, from dorpimo in Indo-European, corresponding to Greek epidorpion, the second part of a symposium with dessert, etc. Or even Danish window, revealing that, the Old Norse vinterauga, revealing that this was originally a window in the attic in the roof, such as this one. And words can even mean more than their lexical semantics. For example, Albanian basic trust as a concept that is the basis for much of the way that social interactions work in Albanian tribal life. It's a culturally rich word, he says. Essentially, the difference between denotative and connotative meanings. The difference between their semantics, understood in the strictest sense, and their pragmatics, that is, the set of associations they summon up in actual use. Proto-Indo-European being a normal language spoken by humans, not all that different in many respects from us today, had its share of words that have meanings and connotations that go beyond the simple lexical denotation, such as the Greek terms you see below. I myself, in my thesis, PhD thesis, have one chapter about Finno-Ugric ethnonyms. What is actually going on here? Because you cannot reconstruct any Finno-Ugric ethnonym for any of the proto-languages involved, or the stages involved, but you see a curious overlapping or a curious parallels between these ethnonyms and words meaning the same as the Proto-Germanic word for Finn in either the languages themselves or neighboring languages. So both the word Finn, the word Suomi in Finnish, the Veps, the Vopes, the Laps, even the name of Estonia, the Ugrins, the Magyar, the Sambi, and even terms in Latin documents from the Middle Ages all show terms that in one way or another fall inside the semantics of Proto-Germanic word, the Proto-Germanic word for fin. So fish, fin, fish scale, pimple, or any kind of protuberance on the skin. And that is, of course, quite remarkable, so it's a shared semantics. What is the reason for this? Well, there are you can imagine different kinds of solutions, but it must certainly involve coincidental homonymy or mistranslations, motivated folk etymology. It could be, for example, that as in Vogel, we have the Siberian language Vogel. We have the word for Russian koper, which is mixed with the word for silver, coming from a word for fish scale, probably because of trade. Compare also the word that the ethnonym Turk probably is related to the word for marketplace in Slavic and Germanic, originally meaning fur or silk, Mongolian word. There we have the fish scales looking like money. I will mention another example of shared semantics, namely an Indo-European concept that I think we can reconstruct. It's a verb, so enter into a new expected phase. For example, a human life phase, a phase of the moon, or a season of the year. Going to, in those languages, also necessary equipment used in a rite of passage between such phases. And we have at least 4 roots involved in denotations of this concept in the individual Indo-European languages. So my point is we cannot reconstruct, perhaps for Proto-Indo-European, or at least involving all the languages, we cannot reconstruct a word or a derivative meaning exactly this, but it's clear that we have this concept because we have 4 roots involved in derivatives where we have a very narrow shared semantics between meanings that are otherwise quite far apart. I will show you. For example, in Lithuanian, we have the word charvei or charvas. sharvas, which means very different things. Discharge after birth, placenta, menstruation, discharge from the mouth of the dead, armament, soldier's outfit, weapons and ammunition, carapace, dowry, burial object, a kind of wagon, bottom board of a wagon, and the month of December. However, the latter meaning is obsolete, so it's from the 1700s, but not Old Lithuanian. The various meanings have been satisfactorily explained, I think, by Van Cleaver in 2006 as from an earlier meaning, physical sign and ritual equipment in a rite of passage. So a rite of passage can be a birth, it can be puberty, male puberty, becoming a soldier, female puberty, becoming pregnant, or at least having the possibility of becoming pregnant, becoming married, die. But he doesn't treat the older meaning, December, mentioned in Budowski's Lexicon Lituanicum from 1700 something, we don't know the exact dates. Formally, the word corresponds to Dioskuros in the name of the Dioscurides, I don't know how you pronounce them in English, the twins, and it's also the name of the Cretan months, the 6th month of the year. You have the Kuretes in Greek, young men in their capacity as warriors, guardians of the infant Zeus, a young girl, Caruso to put on a helmet, and so on, and also Korybantes, armed dances connected with a male child to adulthood passage, literally going to the top in a certain ritual, probably corresponding to the word acrobat, where bat is the same root as bantes, and then the Danish verb ruste corresponding to English, Old English, Hyllested or Christian. This root actually means top or head, but it is not clear in all derivatives, whether it's actually the more abstract meaning or it's a very concrete meaning. So for example, in Coruso, put on a helmet, it could be very concrete, but it also means to arm and to equip in general. So does this come from to put on a helmet, or does it come from the root meaning, the stem meaning in Korybantes, for example? We don't know. That was one root, and then we have another root occurring in Hittite Arma, moon god or month, to be pregnant. There is a Delphish sexual word, and we have Hittite Armish, different words for wheel or wagon, Latin arma, weapons, and different Greek word for instruments, tools in general, and food, and an Umbrian word for rite or ritual. I think that's the closest one to the original meaning, because this is actually the rite and new phase. So it's the new phase of the moon, it's the new phase becoming pregnant, it's the equipment and the rite of passage. But again, some of the terms, it's not clear whether we're actually dealing with a more direct derivative of the word, of the verb, because the verb ar or har also means to link, and occurs in other derivatives, meaning things that have nothing to do with rights. So is wagon parallel to Lithuanian shavas, or is it just from to link? Then we have a third root, or a stem, the one in young English, young, Danish ung, namely jun or juf in Latin, and jaun and jun. This is a stem, not a root, in Lithuanian and Slavic. So we have the moon goddess, Juno, the month of June, in which there were no particular holidays devoted to Juno, so it's probably, as Forsen has suggested, it's probably derived from the new moon itself. Also in Lithuanian we have Jaunaitis, the new moon, and Jaunis, June. Jaunoji is a bride. We have the Latin Juvenes, Juventus, band of young men of military age. And celebration, Eunuch, soldier, hero, young man, and Yug, a legendary figure connected with midsummer. So we can see they can only be connected, all of these, they can only be connected if you compare them to the meanings also shared by Arma and the Lithuanian Shavas words. And the fourth one is from the well-known word for a wheel, which comes from quelch, to turn in Greek. So I have suggested that actually the Germanic word Yule, Danish word for Christmas, but English Yule, Yuletide, is actually, well, it's an old idea that it contains, the second member is the word for wheel, quelchos, not reduplicated, but just losing the laryngeal, as it happens in second member of compounds. And what is then the second part, eu? Well, the other solstice month was in Latin mensis Junius, which has been interpreted as Juno's month or the month of the new moon. But what about if it was just the month of the summer solstice? Note also that the name I mentioned before, this Slavic legendary figure Yug, is connected with midsummer. If so, perhaps Jukla is nothing else than just the midwinter, the turning point of the winter solstice, the turning point that is the winter solstice. Note also that Sanskrit chakram rtasya, meaning the wheel of the year, contains chakram, which is the same root as in, a derivative of the same root as in wheel, and rta is the root we have in arma that I mentioned before. So semantically corresponding to you. So maybe chakram rtasya simply corresponds to you, semantically. And the word might have been borrowed, arma might have been borrowed into neighboring Turkic languages where it actually means a month, the first month of the year. Here we have the bit armonis or corybantes, maybe the acrobats. Are they going to the top or rather entering into a new phase of life because they're in their puberty? And here they are guarding the infant Zeus. We also have the arma word without the M, where it means right in some languages, and even you can even see in Slavic we have the Russian Radunitsa, which is not only remembering of the dead, but also the first Sunday after the first full moon on or following the vernal equinox. And the root also, the stem also occurs in what we might reconstruct as Iranian Ardavan, which has been borrowed into Slavic. So Croatian Radavan, righteous of deceased ancestors, a personal name, but also the designation of a chosen person who enters the home on Christmas morning, performs ritual actions and spells at the fireplace, and is believed to incarnate an ancestor spirit. So again, I would, to sum up, I would reconstruct an Indo-European concept, enter into a new expected phase, but we cannot necessarily reconstruct the word for this concept in Proto-Indo-European. It might have been harmu or armu, it might have been korhu, it might have been chieu, chieuno, quelho, but the concept was there because we can reconstruct this very narrow semantics in all these derivatives. And we can also understand the semantics because the four roots mean to fulfill, accomplish, enter into a new phase, to fit, to link, to join together, top, peak, crown. So the turning point, life, vital force, energy, going to youth, young. So the new phase, the young phase, and turn also of the year. So it makes semantic sense. And there might be a cognate and neuralic, but that's I put this in from a different paper. But it should be noted that in Proto-Uralic you also have a derivative arma, meaning year, or autumn, coming from a word meaning ripening, fulfillment, or new season. So perhaps the Hittite moon, arma, is just a new moon. And then Latin arma weapons are just equipments in a rite of passage. So the final point is that we also have evidence from linguistic landscapes. In the east, in the original Slavic area, we have no non-Indo-European substrates. So all non-Indo-European languages are newcomers. And all substratum proposals involve otherwise unknown Indo-European languages, such as Georg Holzer's Timematisch and various Kentum dialects, as the ones suggested by Henning Andersen. But these languages are all Indo-European. So there is a sharp contrast to all the other Indo-European speaking areas where we have non-Indo-European substrates. And this alone, I believe, is suggestive of the East Slavic area as the point of departure and therefore the homeland. And here I'm summing up the points. So the criteria for our investigations, I think we should omit the old single terms, so like words for snow, words for sea, words for certain plants, and look at this instead, namely the complexity of terminologies pertaining to semantic fields, so-called semantic packages, shared specific semantics of identical formations, shared cultural semantics of non-identical formations, evidence from the structure of the linguistic landscape, where are there non-Indo-European substrates and where are they no no? Where are there no non-Indo-European substrates? And finally, something I haven't really talked about, namely loanword evidence. But this is also relevant for migrations. So I've talked mostly about homeland hypothesis today. And this, of course, can be compared with a point F, non-linguistic or overlapping evidence, both linguistic and non-linguistic, such as our knowledge of prehistoric and historical migrations. And we know them in all directions from the East Slavic area. So I think, at least from a linguistic point of view, we, as a point of departure, would say this is our hypothesis. We also like the southern Russian steppes best, and we would like to compare this with the results reached in modern archaeology. Thank you.
And although we are a bit over time, I think we should take our time for some questions.
Yes, very interesting, of course. Now, when you say the homeland is in the East Slavic area, we need to find out where is the East Slavic area. Where was that?
Yes.
And to my understanding, I mean, it has been placed variously in the swamps of Poland and the Carpathian Mountains, like in Ukraine. But what would be your view?
Yes, we talked. I talked to somebody about this in, a bit in the break. That you can also have. Actually, pinpointing a homeland does not necessarily mean that you say that the peoples who spoke Indo-European were staying in the same area, because it depends on how big this area is. You can have nomads wandering about in an area which we would consider a fixed area on the map. So I think pinpointing a homeland does not necessarily mean that we're talking about peoples who are staying at the same place all the time. When I said the East Slavic area, I meant it deliberately in a broad meaning. But I think it's important to see that, for example, already in the Baltic area you have certain traces of possible substratum languages, also in the toponymy. So I think the only place where we cannot really see any substratum toponymy for which we don't have any direct source is actually the southern East Slavic area today, which also corresponds very well with the mainstream hypothesis, but only, of course, in a broad meaning. So I wouldn't say the swamps, actually. I would say the steppes, or the borderland between the steppes and the woods. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Very small addition, the change in meaning applies also to the word Genghis, because the Genghis Khan, of course, was not the ruler of the seas, but of the steppes. So in the artistic linguistics, it's well known that its former meaning in Mongolian is also the steppes.
Okay.
It's the word Yala today in Kazakh is also the word for steppes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, of course, these two examples were mainly meant as an illustration, a popular illustration of the point, the main point, which is that even populations not living close to the sea have terms for the sea. And synchronically today, of course, in even the populations living most far away from the sea. But I know that not in all respects we can compare populations of this time to modern populations. So thank you very much for this addition.
Adam, a very interesting paper. I want you to reiterate, I don't quite remember, the aspect of these semantics for the initiation of the change of season that tie it to the winter. Was it only the Latin names of the gods that tied it to the winter season? I'm interested because of our dogs being killed in the winter.
Yeah. No, the thing is that we don't really know what Yule in the Germanic word Yule is, and we don't really know why the month of June in Latin was called June, so mensis junius. We can see that synchronically, so in Latin itself, it seems to be a derivative of Juno, the moon goddess, but it doesn't have to be. And there's actually nothing in culture that points to a connection between her and June. she might herself be derived from this June stem, which means the new phase, because she is the moon. And June is also a new phase, the summer solstice. Formally, it can actually be the same. The root can be the same as in Yule, and we also have the stem, no, the root without this N in the stem in a Slavic name of the legendary figure Yug, which is connected with midsummer. But it is not only, I mean, my point here was that it's not only the dichotomic, or it's not only the connection between the words for midsummer and midwinter, which are interesting, but also that this root or this stem occurs in words with totally different meanings, but compared to other derivatives which has the exact same weird package of meanings. So Arma also means the moon and pregnancy and weapons and so on. So you can see in all these four groups you have the same range of meanings, which is weird from if you only look at it from without comparing to the other roots. I don't know if I actually.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is that it's really tied to the notion of solstice rather than to any particular season.
Yes.
The June.
Yes, because it probably meant the turning point.
Yeah, turning point.
The young phase, the new phase.
May I just,
Yeah.
I don't, I'll take you afterwards. Just a little comment to this. With the reconstruction, in the first place, Juchla, you could say the base word in Indo-European means something like life force or strength. That's what you have in Sanskrit, ayu. You make zero rate, and then as you say, the turning root. So the Juchla word might actually mean the turning of life force or the reiteration of life force or something like that, which would be, I think, appropriate.
And that makes sense not only if you talk about seasons of the year, but also passages in a life, in an age of a person.
Yeah, it was about that we're having 4 different words for what would be rite of passage, but it's because maybe we have a word like a specific word for ritual, which might not have existed, because in different areas you can have focused on different parts of the ritual.
Yep.
And that's why I say that you could probably expect, if it's important, you would have several very specific words like you have for horse or for ritual. But if it's a thing that's not so important, you can have a general word.
Exactly.
Like if you ask a child from Copenhagen, they look at something, they'll say it's a fish.
Yes.
But if they grow up in a fishing village, they can say the specific and they will have a many word for it.
Yeah.
So the word, for instance, for salmon and laks might show that it's just a general fish thing,
Yes.
word that is not important.
Yes.
But this ritual thing is probably very important, so they have many words.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was also one of my points, actually, that.
So understood.
Yeah, but we still have to gloss these meanings. I mean, we have to, when we note the meaning, we still have to use the words we use today. So we have to explain it with our words. We can do nothing else.
One more question.
You talked about the word Christmas or Yule. Just wanted to point out that midwinter in Iranian languages is called Yalda, which is very close to Yule, I think.
Yando.
Yalda.
Yando.
But we believe it's Semitic and it's imported into Persian.
Thank you very much for this.